All right, I'm not going to talk about the late prehistoric period, at least not too much, but I'm here to talk to you about getting value out of archaeology, a consideration of the public investment in archaeology. And yes, all of you participate in that through taxes. I'm also going to do a couple of these, a shameless plug for the Applied Anthropology Laboratory. We offer a variety of immersive and experiential and even entrepreneurial learning opportunities for Ball State students. So if you're interested, track me down or stop by and see us in Burkhardt sometime. So in order to do this, we need to know what value is. So I Googled it and found 4 definitions. We have 2 noun senses and 2 verb senses. The first noun sense, which I realize you can't read this now, and I click ahead too fast. The first noun sense encapsulates everything that I'm going to talk about with value. So I wanted something that would actually make that distinction. In the noun, we have something that's held as in high regard to be important, useful, and we also have monetary worth. Well, I want to make distinctions within that, maybe. There we go. And the verb senses actually capture that distinction that I'm going to focus on today. The first verb sense is estimating the monetary worth of something. So that is, I'm going to refer to that as lowercase v value. Well, maybe not. And the second sense is considering something important, useful, holding it in high regard. And that is capital V value. All right, there we go. So sense 1, this is the type of lowercase v value we need to get out of archaeology, to stop valuing and extracting monetary value from the material remains. And the capital V, second sense value, is the type of value that the public should get for their public investment in archaeology. Okay, maybe I'll just step over here so that might work a little bit better. Okay, so now we know what value is. What is archaeology? I assume most of you have heard the word, so go ahead and raise your hand if you think you know what archaeology is. Okay, most of you. Now I'm going to show a couple of pictures, and keep your hand up, or put your hand back up, if this is what you think archaeology is. Okay. Maybe another one? Maybe not. There we go. All right. All right, even more. Random guy walking out in the cornfield with a computer and a portable X-ray fluorescence analyzer. Well, the top 2 are wrong. The definition that I'm going to use is the systematic study of past human life and culture by recovery and examination of the remaining material evidence. And another shameless plug, that's one of the fun toys we get to play with at AAL. So why do archaeology? Well, there are a number of reasons to do archaeology, and one that probably pops to mind is academia, research. But why would we care? What are we doing in archaeology? Well, we want to answer the question of what it means to be human. And in order to do that, we need access to all of the human experience. Well, unfortunately, we didn't start writing things down until about 5,000 years ago, so the vast majority of human experience is not written down, and we only have the material evidence to get to that. And so if we want to learn more about the full response to environmental stimulus, changes like climate change, which has actually happened before, and people have adapted to that. There are also hobbyists in several categories of hobbyists. Amateur archaeologists are those who take archaeology seriously and perform it the way that most professionals do. They use a lot of professional methods, detailed documentation, often publishing their results. And they contribute a lot of value to our knowledge of archaeology. Then there are collectors, and these are hobbyists, private individuals who go out and walk around in a cornfield or a bean field and pick up the pretty artifacts and take it back and put it on display. These people also contribute value and add to our understanding of the archaeological record, especially if professional archaeologists are willing to work with them. That went a little too far, but looters is the last category, and they don't actually do archaeology, but they extract lowercase v value from the material records. And in this category, I include people who are usually breaking federal, local, or even international laws to extract value from the archaeological record. We actually have some state laws in Indiana about archaeology. So before you go and dig up your garden bed looking for artifacts, I suggest you check that out. But you can actually also get money doing that, thankfully. And most of that comes from something called federal undertakings and CRM. And you can check us out on Facebook again. So CRM is Cultural Resource Management, and it is the operationalization of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And this spawned a large industry, which is now, well, it's getting cut off down here, but part of a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. And basically, a federal undertaking is anything that has federal money involved or requires a federal permit. That triggers Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires them to take into consideration the effect of their activities on cultural and historic properties. And in order to do that, you have to actually identify them, and that's where CRM comes in most cases, and that's mostly all we do. We go out and we walk around in fields and we look for artifacts and we map artifacts. Should have checked to make sure my slides actually fit on this screen. So that actually is supposed to say the National Register. But there are 4 criteria for eligibility of the National Register. I also think I skipped something. The National Historic Preservation Act established the National Register, but not in Section 106. The Code of Federal Regulations, 36 CFR 60.4, establishes 4 criteria for the eligibility for being listed on the National Register. And these basically frame the structure for the kind of capital V value that the public should get out of their federal expenditures for archaeology, for these environmental surveys. So we're looking at things that are associated with significant events, criteria A, significant people in history, or aesthetic designs representative of the work of a master, or groups of things that only together have significance, but individually they're not quite important enough to be listed on the National Register. And that's what gives us historic districts. The last one is information potential, and this is the one I'm going to focus on, as it's used the most in archaeology. And that is, has yielded or has the potential to yield information important to our history or prehistory. And skipping again. All right. So CRM and National Register eligibility. This is basically all we do. We do it over and over and over and over again. We survey hundreds of acres, and we identify sites, and we say whether or not we think they're eligible for the National Register. Well, we get into patterns, and over the last almost 50 years now, we've gotten into a series of bad patterns. And what is being done is that we tend to find that people are taking the easy way out when evaluating sites. They identify certain kinds of sites and recommend those to the exclusion of other parts of the archaeological record. And it's also lazy in that we only use criteria D for archaeology. And I want to try to push people away from doing that and to use A, B, and C for archaeology and use D in a slightly different way. And another thing that we find is that a study done in 2012 by Evan Peacock found that about 12% of reports submitted for CRM work actually explicitly use the criteria we're supposed to use in recommending sites as eligible for the National Register. Fortunately, when we're saying they're not eligible, we get it right about 2/3 of the time and officially using the regulations. I still think that they're doing it wrong. So what should be done? The record can be characterized as having 2 kinds of value. Humanistic, capital V, value is roughly synonymous with criteria A through C. Scientific value, capital V again, is where criteria D should come in. It's where we need large samples. We need representative samples, and representative being the key. Maybe? Okay, so these current practices and these patterns are biasing the future of the research into the past. And so we tend to recommend large sites with lots of things. Lots of pretty things are interesting. We enjoy discovering them, but that's not the purpose of CRM. And we get the same types of sites: large habitation sites, mound sites, earthwork sites, sites associated with the houses or playgrounds of rich people. Well, what's wrong with that, right? Those are interesting, right? That's why we do archaeology, for interesting things. Well, how many of you spend all of your time either in a cemetery, a church, or your house? Yeah, well, okay, a few people. But most of us go out. We're not at home right now. we're interacting with people, we're interacting with our environment, we're making a living, we're getting food, we're getting resources to build houses. And prehistoric people and people in the past were the same. They were not at home most of the time. They just came back repeatedly to the same place and dropped a lot of their trash. So CRM is the future of the past. That's the purpose of the legislation, is to keep information so that we can do future research. In order to do future scientific research, we need a representative sample. So here's a diagram taken from Peacock's 2012 paper. You don't need to worry about the definitions, but these dark gray and black, those are the kinds of sites, just a few of the different kinds of possible sites that they're recommending. The light gray, which actually even looks white on this now, and the white are the ones that nobody's recommending these kinds of sites. And actually, those are the categories where you have the highest number of sites. And so what happens is we end up ignoring 95% of the archaeological record in CRM. So how can you do science with such a small, biased sample? Well, you can't. So STEM, yes, STEM. Anthropology, archaeology is part of anthropology, is science. We have theoretical foundations. We derive hypotheses from our theoretical perspectives, and we test those with empirical evidence. It is science. We also use technology, and anthropology can be used to inform engineering, and we use math in measuring the empirical record and testing our hypotheses. I'm also a fan of transdisciplinary method and technology, particularly, for me, geochemistry. This is an example of what you get from a typical Phase 1 first pass CRM identification survey. Each dot is an artifact. The different colors are different sites. And so we have here a bunch of flakes, the debris of making tools. Most archaeologists see that and say, well, I can't learn anything about that. There's no information potential if I do more work here, and so therefore, it's not eligible for the National Register. Well, we tested that. We went out and we collected soil samples, and then we did geochemistry on them. This is showing variations in phosphate level, and there are a couple of them, particularly, where's the pointer? Yeah, there. This one here and this one here that are not explained by variations in topography, variations in geology, or variations in the previous ecology. This is explained by the prehistoric land use. And these are probably gardens where they were preferentially extracting nutrients. And this is actually, further tests reveal this is multiple elements that are vital to plants are being extracted. So we have gardens here. This is invisible by the normal methods of archaeology. Most archaeologists would say there was no information potential there, yet we did simple, short geochemical tests and found, what do you know, information. So now, information potential and information theory. This is how I think that criteria D should be used. We should be borrowing from information theory. Claude Shannon, pictured on the right there in 1955, is the father of the information age. And in the 1940s and 1950s, he developed the concepts of information theory. Information theory is all about transmission of a message. So we're communicating, I write something down, pass it along, I'm transmitting a message in time. The archaeological record does the same thing. Communication involves a signal or a message that has complexity and redundancy. And if it's a highly complex message or highly complex language, then there's a low level of redundancy. If it's a redundant message, then you don't need every single character in order to get the meaning out of that. And Shannon's experiments actually found that written English language is about 75% redundant. So only need one out of every 4 letters in the books that you're reading to get the message out of there. Just a highly redundant signal. This brings us to entropy. Entropy was Shannon's definition of information. Entropy is no order, disorder. So we know about that in thermodynamics. Well, it's the same thing in information theory, the lack of order. And so when there is no order or not obvious order in the signal, that's high entropy, and then that means every character is valuable. You have to get that next observation in order to be able to read the message. So this brings us back to criteria D and information potential. So we're looking for non-predictable, high entropy sequences are information potential. And that's not what we're going for. If we're sampling the same kind of sites over and over again, we know what we're going to get when we dig, right? And so we fortunately have a set sequence in CRM. We go through phase 1, we walk over the ground, we look at it, we map all the artifacts, and then we say, Well, what they do now is, oh, this is interesting, I want to dig here. This is not interesting, I don't want to dig here. But what they should be doing is, well, I can't predict what's going to happen if I dig here, and so that's information potential. They can still use criteria A through C, that's fine, but using information potential for something that they know what they're going to get is doing it the wrong way. So, getting value out of archaeology. Well, my text boxes don't show up very well. Here's an example of a phase 1 survey where we did find lots of things. This is 17 acres, and that blob right here is a little bit bigger than this room, and it has about 11,900 of those 12,000 artifacts. And based on the kind of artifacts, I kind of knew what to expect, what I was going to get next. So we dug a little deeper, metaphorically. We looked harder at the data, used more sophisticated spatial analysis methods, and we get this. And maybe you can't see that all the way in the back, but trust me, there are several clusters here, and they represent household clusters. So now I can predict with a high degree of accuracy where they put their trash, where they buried their people, where their houses were, and where their fireplaces were, and how many ceramics I'm going to find. I don't need to dig to get that. No information potential. Eligible by criteria C, but no information potential. You can go ahead and do the next one. And again. All right, so a harder case. Here, this black box is another area where we did survey, and the red blob here is also about a 3-acre site, a little bit bigger than this room, only 114 artifacts. I had no idea what to expect. And this dot here is 3 artifacts. So we dug a little deeper, did some geochemistry, and boom, popped out this circular organization, the same pattern as the previous site. And so I now know what I get if I dig. No information potential. Criteria C, yes. Information potential D, no. But I don't know what these 3 flakes are still. It looks like we are getting some changes in the geochemistry. So we dig a little deeper, and this time almost literally. We took a deeper soil sample, about 1.5 feet deep, and then right underneath where those flakes are, you have an increase in phosphate. And so this is not something that anybody would have predicted. And in fact, the people who did the original survey said that site was not eligible by criteria D, no information potential. Yet we learned something else about it. So now getting lowercase v value out of archaeology, we have to acknowledge that private collections have value, capital V, and that we can get information out of them if they maintain context and if we are willing to work with them. But artifact trading destroys capital V value for the sake of individual gain of lowercase v monetary value. So, formula to get value out of archaeology, you take information, add some science, subtract bad practices, subtract lowercase v value, and gain a full scientific understanding of our shared humanity. Thank you.